The ancient tomb. That morning, a man came to report a case very early. There was a big explosion in the mountain. People suspected there was vandalism. James, Michael, and some of the police officers instantly followed the man to investigate the case. That is right in front of us, the foothill where the explosion had been found. The man talked to them. The case was confirmed at West Foothill in the west of the city. As the historical records, there was an ancient tomb under there. Police officers suspected that the grave thieves had targeted that ancient tomb. Once the man took James and his two fellows to the scene, there were many giant stone statues. James knew that those statues had been built to guard the tomb. Back then, ancient people usually built stone statues formed as animals and put them in front of the tomb for spiritual powers. They believed that those statues could protect the tomb well. While nearly stepping to the crime scene, James reminded his crew had to be careful since grave thieves weren't simple. Everyone, you gotta be careful. Nowadays, grave thief has weapons with them. We don't know what could they have. They are very bold. Don't downplay them. When walking through the statues, the man pointed ahead. That's it, here we are. James saw a big hole from afar. The soil had been explored out badly due to the explosion as reported, which looked new, might be just happened a few hours earlier. They came up close to the hole, which was really the entrance to the tomb for grave thieves. The spot led straight to the ground. There was a rope as well, which was tied to one of the giant statues nearby, followed the hole. The other end had been dropped to the tomb. James watched around carefully, but there was no one there. They had been down there to the tomb. We gotta come under to check out. They might be still there. James decided to come down to the grave. Chief, that is unclear what it could be under the tomb. Let me come down first. You could be here to wait and check around. Michael requested to come first. James worried that Michael could not handle everything there by himself. He replied, because that is unclear down there. I have to go down there with you to be sure. Moreover, James requested Lucas to stay put up there, to call back up if there was anything. Lucas, you stay put here, and call back up if needed, okay? After settling things down, James and Michael came down to the tomb by using the rope. James came first. One of his hands held a gun, his other hand had a flashlight. He turned to Michael, Michael, be careful, and follow my lead. The two of them had walked in the long dark hall of the ancient tomb. They had walked for a while, but there was no sign of the grave thieves. Then James suddenly stopped. He saw someone in front of them. Michael, there is someone here. James slashed the flashlight ahead. A man was standing in the hallway afar. James shouted out, police. Hand up. He shouted a few times, but the man didn't move. James came up close to the man's behind and pointed the gun to the man's head. Surprisingly, the man tilted. He fell on the ground. James and Michael could see him clearly then. There were many arrows on his body. He had died a long time earlier. Probably, the man had been trapped by one of the traps of this tomb. He had stopped bleeding. Definitely, he had died a while. His partner might be still in there. We gotta be quick. James thought that the grave thieves didn't leave yet. They walked a bit more and saw the center of the tomb ahead. James had shed light. Michael, quick, the center of the tomb was right in front of us. They continued to walk deeper to the tomb. Another dead body was found. Chief, look at this. This man doesn't look live at the same time with us. He looked like from the past. Michael gazed at the dead body. He furrowed his eyebrows. That man had died. He couldn't examine how long, but the dead body had turned to be a withered corpse. His clothes looked like the people from the past. James thought that was one of the first grave thieves there. They passed by the corpse. James and Michael crept to the coffin in the center. They looked inside to check carefully. The two of them widened their eyes surprisingly. The tomb was very messed up. There was another dead body lying in the ground with a sword through his chest. There were some other weapons around the dead body. The coffin in the center had been opened. Moreover, there was a stone tablet in the tomb. They saw a wearing armor man was holding a sword and tended to stab a knelt man. Police, hand off your weapon. James was unable to instantly read the scene. The man with the armor was the owner of the tomb or one of the thieves. In that situation, he could not let anyone be killed or hold any weapons. Hearing James's voice, but the man ignored him as if he didn't hear anything. James had no choices. He shot one to the sword. The man with the armor looked like a tycoon in the past. The shot was helpful. The sword on the tycoon's hand fell to the ground. The tycoon had been lost his weapon. He was full of surprise. At that moment, the man who was kneeling down got the opportunity, ran toward James and Michael to ask for help. Help! Help me! Countless wounds were dropping blood on his body. He ran towards Michael and shouted, "Please help! He was haunted by a ghost. He is gonna kill me." Michael handcuffed the man. He was so panicked but was still able to summarize what happened to him. He told them that the man in the tycoon clothes was one of his partners. He was haunted by the ghost in the tomb and tended to take revenge on him. Help! Ghost, he was haunted. Run! The grave thief shouted in panic. James sensed something wrong, but he was unable to confirm that man was human or not. The tycoon in the armor suddenly eye-rolled, had a heavy breath. They could saw there was white smoke from his noses, looked very scary. Since he was a murderer, police could not stay till James and Michael took out their gun and pointed toward the man in the armor. Hand up, you're under arrest. James and Michael came close to him. The man was standing still, without a word. While the two police were hesitating, the tycoon suddenly grabbed the gun from Michael. Michael tended to take the gun back, but his opponent was powerful. Then he heard, scatter, the gun had been scattered in his hands. The situation turned to be bad. At that moment, James gave the tycoon a fire, but the bullet hit his armor, so the man was still fine. The gunshot drove the tycoon angry. He turned to James with his pop eyes. Michael took the chance to punch a strong one to the tycoon's head, but the punch didn't matter. With just a through hand from him, Michael was lying on the ground. He was so strong, Michael had been felt 4 to 5 meters away and hit his head to the wall. He got dizzy and nearly passed out. James took the opportunity at that moment. He kicked to the head of the man in the armor. Surprisingly, his head plate had been flown out of his body. That was an excellent shot, but once James turned to him, he saw he was picking his sword up from the ground. Instantly, the tycoon stabbed James by the sword strongly. Careful, Chief. Michael watched from the behind and tended to join and save James, but that was too late. The man was powerful. The sword had stabbed James's body. Blood was streaming from his body instantly. James hugged the man tight to buy time for Michael. Since he assumed the man wasn't normal, even he and Michael together couldn't stop him, so he would like to hug the man so that Michael could have enough time to run out. Michael, run. Michael saw his chief was in a bad injury. His eyes turned red. Michael didn't want to run away. Michael stepped a heavy step toward him, desperately. Chief. At that moment, the tycoon pushed James out. By chance, Michael held an iron stick tightly on the ground. He hit the iron stick to the tycoon. The tycoon might be more potent than an average person. Even though he was solid or mad, he was surprised by Michael's hit. He fell to the ground and passed out. Michael rushed to James's place to check out the wounds. Chief, how are you? Are you okay? Michael lifted James up. He was indeed in a bad injury. Michael had checked him up overall. There was a stab through his chest, and he got bleeding non-stop. James tried to stand up, but he was collapsed to the ground. He was shaking and unable to stand up straight since that was a terrible injury. At that moment, Lucas reached there to back them up. James had passed out. Even Michael had called him multiple times, but he could not awaken. James had been taken to the hospital right after then. Regarding the tycoon, he had been detained at the Institute 703, the research center for the exceptional cases. To make it clear, Michael came directly and questioned the alive grave thief. Please tell us what happened truly from the start. He smashed the table badly and yelled at him. However, the grave thief had given an unbelievable answer. He declared that there were 4 members in his group. They had heard about the tomb under the west foothill, so they created a big hole as an entrance. But once they put their feet under the tomb, the first one had stepped in a trap and died instantly by dozens of arrows. The other 3 started panicking but still decided to continue to risk their lives to go to the center. They got a belief there would be a fortune in the tomb, and they would be rich afterward. But except for weapons, there was no valuable stuff around them in the center of the tomb, so they decided to open the coffin to find luck. The owner of that tomb was indeed a tycoon in the past. His body was withering as a corpse there. Unfortunately, there was no treasure or any valuable things in the tycoon's coffin. "Ethan, what are you doing?" The leader had spoken up. The whole crew was disappointed with that treasure hunting trip. They couldn't find any things. One of them leaned toward the coffin and picked up the sword right next to the tycoon in the coffin. Just by a glance, they could see that was a precious sword. The leader was so afraid that the sword might be broken, he raised his voice, "Be careful, don't break that precious sword." Suddenly, Ethan used the sword to stab the leader's chest, the one he called brother. The leader fell to the ground and died swiftly. The other one was frightened. Surprisingly, he saw Ethan took and wore the tycoon's armor. "Ethan, are you insane? What are you doing?" After the moment Ethan wore the armor, he was likely to be another one. His voice had changed. He introduced himself as the owner of the tomb, the tycoon. "How dare you to come here to bother me? Don't you want to live?" What are you talking about? What do you want?" The man was frightened to death and unable to read the scene then. "You invaded my place, all of you are gonna be punished, you are all gonna die." Ethan upheld the sword and tended to kill his partner. He was not like the Ethan everyone knew. He was controlled by the tycoon's ghost. "Please, forgive me. Please, tycoon." His partner begged the tycoon for forgiveness. Right after the blade was in front of his nose, fortunately, James and Michael reached and stopped the tycoon in a sneak of time. He was nearly killed by the tycoon in his partner's body. "Luckily, you guys come in time, or else I'm unable to sit here. All I told you are the truth." The grave thief told them in fear for what he had been through. Michael and another police officer turned to each other and ended the investigation there. "We have questioned for dozen times, but he still keeps trash talking. He is such a stubborn one. What do you think, Michael?" "I don't think he is a liar, but I don't think there is a ghost haunting in this world. We gotta wait for the examined result from Professor William, to be sure. I am going to Institute 703. Everything here would be on you." Michael headed to Institute 703 to check the examination about the man in the armor in the tomb, named Ethan. That was a unique research center. Michael came to Professor William and asked after Ethan the grave thief. "Professor William, what is Ethan's case result? Is he really insane or just pretended to be?" This is really interesting, Michael." Professor William said that Ethan had introduced him as a tycoon, an actual tycoon in the past, and recorded in the ancient book. They looked to the cell where Ethan had been. Inside there, he was growling and mumbled some weird stuff. "Let's see how I punished you. How dare you touch me, a great tycoon. Once I get out of here, I'll chop your head out one by one." That was astounding to them. The tycoon that Ethan called him was very prestigious and majestic, who had been written in the history books. The tomb was his afterlife house. Ethan was illiteracy, and didn't know who the tycoon was prior. He definitely wasn't able to say in an ancient way like that. Professor William gathered all of the information and gave Michael the results. The rest would be handled by 703 institutes. The rest would be handled by us. I have written in details in this file. Here you are. When Michael was nearly leaving, Professor William asked him, "Transfer those to that old man and tell him to come by any time. I'll buy him a drink." The old man he had mentioned was no one other than James. He was hospitalized due to his lousy injury. Even he got stabbed, but the sword didn't touch his heart, so he was like a revenant. "Chief, this is the case's result." Michael came to the hospital and handed him the file. Michael had reported in details the case's progress to James. "Thank you, Michael." James took the file and gave him a smile. After then, he read the file. Then he asked Michael to bring the file to the office's store and sealed it up.